Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/the Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we got the privilege of talking to John tonight. He reached out to me from East Texas. How's it going tonight, John?
It's going well. Good to be here.
I'm excited to talk to you. It's been a little bit of time in coming, but I'm going to actually let you have the floor. Feel free to introduce yourself as you would see fit, and you can head right into what you've experienced.
All right. Sounds good. I'm just a regular guy. I'm not a professional Bigfoot hunter, I guess you'd say. And what I really want to do is just share my observations and some of my experiences that I've had over the years that's been a part of my Bigfoot journey. It started back in grade school. Back in my day, there was this deal where there was a book club and the teacher would get a brochure and she would hand it out, and there was selection of books that you could purchase. And so anyway, I'm thinking I'm about in 7th grade, and I'm looking through the brochure and I see this book, and it's like a double feature. It's on one side you got Bigfoot, and on the other side you got the Loch Ness Monster. And so I thought, man, that looks pretty interesting. So I ponied up my money and ordered it. In a couple of weeks, your books come in. And then I'll never forget, she got the box and she's walking through class. She's passing out the books. She's, oh, okay, little Susie, I see that you got a book. Oh, let's see, the Julia Childs, the chef. Oh, boy, that'll be good. And little Jimmy, oh, you got a book here on the Apollo astronauts. Oh, that'll be good. And then she gets to mine, and I'll never forget. She pulls it out, and she looks at it. She's like, oh, John, you got a book on Bigfoot. And she says, I hope you realize that this is nothing more than a man in a monkey suit. And I was thinking to myself, well, this is great. I spent all my money and I've got a book on a man in a monkey suit. And so I thought, at least there's the Loch Ness Monster. So anyway, I got home and I just put it on my bookshelf, never even touched it. So I guess it's about a month later, and I'm over with my little buddy, and we're riding our dirt bikes, and it goes to a rainstorm comes up, and his mother calls us in and says, y'all kids get out, lightning's going to strike you. So we come on in the house, and so we're sitting there and we're watching the TV, and like a lot of people that I've heard on different podcasts, all of a sudden there's this show that comes on, and I'm hearing Leonard Nimoy. I'm thinking, my gosh, that's Spock. And it's, of course, it's the old In Search Of series that was on. And the particular one that was on that day was on Bigfoot. And so I sit there, I'm glued to the TV. And I mean, as fast as the show is over, I am lickety split home, and I've grabbed that book and I read it cover to cover 3 or 4 times. I wish I could remember the name of it, but I can't for the life of me. But so anyway, that sort of kicked off my whole Bigfoot experience, at least to give me some knowledge. As I grew older, I grew up on a ranch in New Mexico in the Rocky Mountains, San de Cristo Mountains, and hunted and fished and just lived in the mountains. The ranch was at 9,000 feet, so we were way up in the mountainside. And never the whole time I was there did you ever hear anything about Bigfoot, see any Bigfoot, any signs or anything of them. If you heard of Bigfoot, it was always the Pacific Northwest. You just never heard of them in that area. And I just grew up like a lot of people. I'm like, I believe they exist, but they're in the Pacific Northwest. As time passes, as life goes on, you focus on your job and whatnot and another. And so anyway, it rocks on I'd say about 20 years. And my late wife and I, we decided that we were going to do a lot of traveling up in the Pacific Northwest, all through Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, Alberta, the Canadian Rockies, the Yukon territories, Alaska. We went all the way to the Arctic Circle. And we spent a lot of time just in not the tourist trap places, but the off the road places. We did a lot of fishing. We would fly into different camps and so on and so forth. We did a lot of rafting down the rivers, fishing, and we had a lot of Native American guides, and they're particularly the Chillicothe tribe. Of course, there were some people from I think it's the Tagish, and then there was there's another one. I can't recall what they were. Inuit Indians. And so you would hang around them. And one thing that I noticed about them was that when you bring up Sasquatch, they're very protective about it. They don't really share a lot. They may say something, we believe this or that, but it's not until they get to know you a little bit better that they'll start to actually share what they actually believe. And like I said, we'd been around a lot of fishing guides. We had gone to a training facility. There was a lady that was training dogs for the Iditarod, and she had a couple of people that worked with her, Native American mushers, and they had some pretty interesting stories about experiences that they've had. Of course, another group of people that I love to talk to is the bush pilots, because they're flying into all these remote areas, and so they have a lot, of course, that bird's eye view. But when you're up there and you're taking all that in, there's so many things that it's just, you would be hard pressed to go to that area and not believe that a Sasquatch exists. The museums, of course, there are oral histories, there are written histories. You've got carvings and paintings and totem poles that go back hundreds of years, and it's just fascinating that all of these tribes had their own opinion and take. There's actually a book out that I want to read by Kathy Strain, I think is her name. It's called Giants, Cannibals, and Monsters. And I can't remember this lady's background, but it's basically about various Indian tribes and how that they distinguish Sasquatch. What is their opinion? Some of them consider it to be evil, some of it consider it to be good, and that's the same thing that I picked up in Canada. Was there's somewhat variations in how that they looked at a Sasquatch for each particular tribe. But so anyway, I returned. We're back in Texas, and I'm still skeptical. I 100% believe Sasquatch is in the Pacific Northwest and Canada, possibly Montana in that area. But I'm just so skeptical that there could be any Bigfoot Sasquatch in the lower 48 or the South. That's my attitude. I'm very skeptical. I actually manage a ranch, and we've got several thousand acres. It's a mix. There's pasture land, there's cypress bottoms, we got plantation pines, and then the ranch is backed up to what's called Type 2 land, which in Texas it's basically wildlife preserve that you can hunt on it, but it's basically land that's untouched. And then backed up to that is a bunch of timberland that's owned by the timber company. And there are some hunting leases on it, but not that many. And we're talking thousands upon thousands of acres that are continual. And inside of this acreage there's rivers, there's lakes, there's just on the ranch alone, there's 4 artesian wells that have the best water you've ever tasted. There's canals and just multiple water sources is, I guess, what I'm trying to get at. But so I'm out in this every day, and I'm oblivious to what's going on around me. I would hear wood knocks, and I'd be like, oh, a tree falling in the woods. I would hear whoops and say, some kind of a coyote, cichlid coyote. And I just wouldn't put any credence in what I was hearing. And I was just there again. They're not down here. And one day we were fixing some fence, and I had a pasture with some young bulls that would be east of where we were fixing this fence. And so a lot of times when you got those young bulls together, they'll try to show out to each other, and they'll have this very low beller. They'll just boo, and they'll try and call another one out to have a push and shove match. And so this bull was walking around out there, and he was doing this low beller. And all of a sudden, I noticed that directly to the west of us, I was hearing the same kind of sound, although it was different. It's a little more raspy. And I got thinking, I was like, what in the world? Because the area that I was hearing the sound coming from was plantation pine. And there should not be any cattle over there. So my first thought is one of them's got out of the pen and he's got over there and got lost in the plantation. So we got through fixing the fence, and I go to the pasture to check out the bulls. They're all there. And so then I go to check the fence, and the fence is not broke. And I'm thinking to myself, what was the deal? Because I know there's not any other cattle back there. And I was very perplexed by that. And so I come home, and I'm just sitting around, and I thought, let me just look and see. And so I get to looking on various websites, and there's people that have said, yeah, that Bigfoot, Sasquatch they'll mimic sounds such as that. They'll do whistles. They may do howls. And I got to think, well, that's interesting. That happened that day. And so it was just one little tidbit that was moving me in that direction. And so anyway, a couple of days pass, and I'm starting to just pay a little bit more attention to what's going on. So I end up meeting this lady, and she is just a Bigfoot, a wealth of information. She has just, from her childhood, she has studied Bigfoot backwards, forwards, up and down. And so we get to talking, and when I'm telling her about it, and she implies you need to be a little more aware of what's going on, and you might actually open up a world to you. And so I do. I start paying a little bit, when I'm hearing wood knocks, I'm starting to pay a little bit closer attention to them, and so on and so forth. And so we end up going to a Bigfoot convention in Jefferson. And I end up talking to this lady. She's a biologist, but she had some other degree in plants that I don't remember exactly what it was. I'd never heard of it before. But so we get to discussing various things about Bigfoot. And she is the first person that I remember that coined the term wood ape. And I thought, and so it stuck with me. And so we were talking about various things, and she said, what is it exactly that you don't believe that they're down here? And I'm like, I don't know that there's enough. I'm skeptical about the food source. And she said, obviously, John, there's rodents, there's deer, there's hogs. And I was like, yeah, I understand that, but you would think that there would need to be more. And she goes to explain to me in great detail about other various plants that a wood ape could actually eat and survive on. And when I started thinking about it, I was like, gosh, when you think about it, a ton of muscadines. We've got dewberries. We've got what's called Pope salad, which, if not prepared correctly, is poisonous. But I traveled in Africa, and I remember some of the great apes in Africa would eat these particular leaves that they could eat, but if a human was to eat them, they would kill you. And so I got to think, there again, that could certainly transfer over here. But the one thing that she said, a couple of things that really stuck, and one of them is hackberry trees. And I had always, it's one of them deals where your buddy says, oh, them hackberry trees are poisonous. And so from that point on, you think they're poisonous. But in reality, hackberries are like a superfood, and the ranch is loaded with these hackberries. And I was thinking, wow, that's something I hadn't thought of. And then something else she pointed out was, she said turtles. She said that we feel like the wood apes, that's part of their diet. And that is something that I would see constantly, would be turtle shells, where you would see the top laying over here and the bottom laying over here. And I would mention it to people, and they'd say, oh, that's gators doing that. Well, then one day I saw a gator eat a turtle, and there's no top and bottom. It's just the whole thing. And so I eliminated that theory altogether and started paying closer attention, because there was turtle shells all over the place. And then another thing that she had mentioned was grub worms. we've got lots of white oak, and of course they get old and die, and the things are full of grubs. And I would see places where that the bark was peeled off, and occasionally we have what's called honey bears. They're just little bitty black bears, and they're very scary. If they see you, they're going to run like crazy. But I just thought that's probably what it is, some honey bears. But when I got to paying closer attention, I noticed that these scab marks on these trees were higher, and I got thinking, yeah, that's just not a bear. So anyway, I come back from this convention and got a little bit more knowledge. And so one day we're working on a project where we're clearing a lane to a back property line. And I was on a dozer and I was pushing a lane. And so got all I could do the one day and then backed the dozer off and went and did something else. A couple of days later, I come back and I walk upon the most textbook tree break that I've ever seen. It was an ironwood tree, roughly 3.5, 4 inches in diameter. It's bent down, back down to the bottom of itself. And no, absolutely not a weather-related situation. This was clearly bent down. And that, with the knowledge that I got at the convention and seeing that tree break, I started thinking there's something going on here. And so I really started to pay even closer attention at that point. I had mentioned it to my girlfriend, and she was telling me, she said, you know what you need to do? She had listened to a podcast where a lady was talking about, and she brought that up to me, and I thought, you got to be kidding me. That's ridiculous. But then I remember we had gone to that expedition Bigfoot up in Blue Ridge, Georgia, and I remember there reading an article in there at that museum where this lady had started this gifting program. So anyway, at first I thought that's ridiculous, me gifting a wood ape. And one day I was in my office doing something, and I happened to just see, she had mentioned to me that they had shiny stuff. I came across a set of Mardi Gras beads. And so I thought, man, perfect deal. I put them in the trunk. A couple of days later, I take them to this way back piece of the property. And I get back there, and of course, the instructions were that you take 2 sticks and form them in a right angle, and then you put the item behind these sticks. I did exactly like I was told, and I'm thinking, this is nuts. This is totally nuts. And I get busy on another project. It's probably a week, if not more, before I get back down there. So I pull up there. I'm on a Polaris, and I pull up there. And as I'm driving up there, I'm noticing something that seems out of place. And I'm thinking, what in the world? And as I get closer, what I find is just bizarre. I find a happy birthday balloon, like that you would get at Walgreens or Walmart. And obviously, somebody had a birthday and the balloon had got away. But I just can't believe that it would have landed where my gifting area was. So I find this happy birthday balloon. And then the second thing that was even more strange was I found a gallon oil jug from Texaco, Haviland Supreme, from back in the 90s. And I'm thinking, how did that get here? Now, the beads were still there, but apparently they had gifted me a balloon and an oil jug. I laughed it off at first, but then I got to think something did this. And I know it's not people because we're talking way back. And the places, we watch the property very closely. And so that kind of got to me, I guess you'd say. And it was just one more thing. So a couple of more weeks pass, and I'm on another project. We had a 30-acre lake that blew out during Hurricane Harvey. We had 30 inches of rain. It blew the levee out. And so when the lake blew out, it actually caused there to be a lagoon. And at the back edge of it, there's a little kind of an island that sticks out. So I was patching a road, and I was stealing some clay from an area there to patch this road. And so I'm on a skid steer. I'm going back and forth patching this road. And I get to where I'm done, and as I'm leaving, I noticed that there's a hitch pin that's on this piece of equipment that had fallen off. So I thought it had happened before. The thing's like $200. So I thought, man, I got to go find this thing. So I know that I've only been to the lagoon and back. So I just park the machine and I walk. So I walk down the trail. I get to this lagoon area, and sure enough, I find the pin laying there in the dirt, pick up the pin. But as I'm turning around, I've got this feeling that something is watching me. You know how it'll come over you sometimes. And so I turn around and I look, but I don't see anything. And so just on a whim, I grab my camera and I just snap. I do a 1/8 snap and just go on about my business. I come home, and later that night, I'm going through the pictures, looking. I don't see nothing. And then all of a sudden, I see this picture that's just bizarre, and I can't really make it out. I blow it up. I put it on my home computer, blow it up a little bit more. And I did not see this when I took the picture. So I did not know it was there when I took the picture. But as I go to looking at it, the best way I can describe it, and this is going to sound ridiculous, it sounds like the lead singer of the Insane Clown Posse. It's this weird looking face, and you can clearly see eyes and a nose, a pudgy nose, but the top of the skull, from like right above the eyebrow, going over kind of the top of the skull, you can clearly see where there's no fur. It's just skin. And on the other side, you can clearly see that there's hair there. It's behind a branch. There's a branch in the way, but you can make out its face, and it's not hunching down. And it was actually on that little island in that foliage looking at me. And it's one of these pictures, some people will look at it and they'll instantly see it. Other people look at it and they'll be like, I don't know what you're talking about. But I thought it was really interesting. So I thought, it's one more thing. And there again, time passes on. I'm paying more attention. I notice one day I get there at the ranch and I'm hearing what sounds like a peacock, and way back in the woods. And when I'm thinking, man, how did that get there? And so I go back there. I don't see any sign of any peacock or anything such as that, but clearly heard what sounded like a peacock. As I'm going back there, I go through an area where there's a tremendous growth of hackberries, and the berries had made, and they were just thick. And so I actually go over there. I'm going to get some and eat them. And I happen to look down, and I noticed there it was sand, and it was wet sand, so it was like hard packed. But you could see where that something had come up there and had reached up to grab some of the berries, and it made an imprint. Nothing that was castable, but it was something that you could make it out. Especially, in the picture you can't really see it that well, but being there you could see it. But what I noticed was that the print, it's not like what I would have thought. Like, it wasn't a Sasquatch print. It wasn't something that was 16 inches long and 7 inches wide or like that. It was actually, you could see that it had toes. But what shocked me the most was it was very wide. It was compared to its length. And that goes back to my conversation with this woman about the wood apes. And so that kind of put me over into the camp of, I believe, and I know a lot of people disagree with me, but I believe in East Texas, I believe that we have wood apes. It'd be hard for me to believe that a 9-foot Sasquatch could maneuver through the thick underbrush that we typically have. Now, don't get me wrong, there's areas that are open, but the majority of it is pretty viney and it's thick. And not only that, a lot of the bottom areas are quite swampy. And I think in my opinion, I think that something more in the 7-foot bracket and down with a much wider foot is better suited for that type of territory to get around in. And so after seeing that print, I'm getting over there in this wood ape camp even more. there again, here we go again. Another couple of weeks go by, and I'm going down a trail. I forget what I was doing. I was going back there to check something. And all of a sudden, I smell this. I get this whiff of this smell that smells exactly like the inside of a beaver den. I know a lot of people say it smells like sewer and so on and so forth, but this was like musky inside of a beaver den. And so I'm on the player, slam on the brakes, and I just go to looking around. And there again, I'm not seeing anything, but I just start taking pictures. That's it. Get on back to my office and start looking, and here again, I see this shape. I see this head. There's a tree that's fallen over, and the roots have pulled up out of the ground, so it's got dirt on them. And there's this creature that's up there against these roots, and lo and behold, you can see the baldness in the head again. And I'm like, here we go again. This could clearly be the same. I'm looking at the same guy again. I think 2 days later, about less than a quarter of a mile from where I got this picture of this creature, I had some trail cameras set out. And of course, don't get me started on trail cameras, because that's the biggest mystery in the world, is why we can't get a good shot of one on a trail cam. But I did have one that was set. I actually set it in a rotten tree, to where that it was not on the outside of the tree. It was inside the tree. And you could not see this thing. Of course, it was only shooting forward, very limited scope. But I got a picture of what appears to be, and I've looked at it 100 times. It looks like it's a hip and possibly an elbow of something. I recreated it. I know it's absolutely not a deer. It's not a honey bear because it's too high, and it's not a coyote or anything like that. It had to be something that at least was standing about 4 feet tall. And like I said, it's just like a hip and an elbow, but it was something. That's the only picture that I've ever got on any of the trail cams of any value that I would say, as far as that goes. But so it's like last year, middle of the winter, it's freezing, and my girlfriend and I decided that we're going to go back to the back part of the property where the lake, the old lake that blew out is. And so I think it's 12 degrees. We're crazy. And so we go out there, and so we're easing around. Everything is just solid, especially for Texas. 12 degrees for Texas. East Texas is cold. And so we're easing around, and we get to this area, and we notice it was one of those deals where that it was 60 degrees one day, and then the next day it's 12. And so the day prior, it had rained, and so everything's sloppy. And we noticed right there at the edge of this embankment is a very clear, I would call it a baby. I wouldn't even call it a juvenile. It was a very small footprint that it actually was made when it was wet, but it had froze. And there again, it was something you couldn't really cast it, but it was a pretty interesting footprint. And so that kind of we got our hopes up on that deal. And we went on and did some more driving around, and we had got to a point where I wanted to check and see if I could see any footprints. There was an area that had washed out, and I just wanted to go there. And so we killed the Polaris for just a second, and we're sitting there just listening. And all of a sudden, we hear on an old logging tram, we hear what sounds like a gibbon monkey. It has that exact sound like a gibbon, and it does it 3 distinct times. And of course, we are rookies. I mean, you talk about rookies. We are like rookies. We don't have any recording. We're sitting there just listening. Hear it 3 times. Finally, we wake up, start recording. Of course, at that point, we don't hear it no more. But very distinct, like a gibbon monkey, 3 times. We stay there an hour or two left, and then we head out. And when we get to the truck, there again, my girlfriend was saying, she said, did you notice that there was some like songbird? And I thought, yeah, I did hear that. And the more we got to thinking about it, we got to think, obviously, on a day like today, there's not going to be songbirds out singing. And one of those missed opportunities again, where it possibly could have been wood apes out there doing some whistling. Of course, we vow, oh man, no, next time we're going to be way better prepared. So more time goes on, and this probably goes down as one of the most impressive things that I've seen as far as my Bigfoot investigations have been going. And I was coming out of a pasture, and I was shutting the gate. I was actually horseback, and so I'm shutting the gate. I get the horse through. I'm going to shut the gate, and I happen to look down on the ground, and it's there again. It's sandy type soil, and I went down there, and this just shocked me. There was one of our cow dogs print. There was a perfect dog print in this sand, and then something had taken its finger and had made a circle around that dog print. And I just have to believe that was a parent teaching a small one, okay, here, this is a dog print. Look out for this. Be aware of this. And I got a pretty good picture of it, but that just really stuck with me. I've never heard of anybody that has came across anything like that, or that was the first time I had actually ever seen it. So there again, I'm more on track. I think there's wood apes in East Texas. So fast forward, it's this past Christmas, and I had got a thermal camera. So now we're moving up. I've got some equipment. And so I'm thrilled to death. We got a thermal. And so we go out, and we get there at the ranch, and I've got to put out some hay to some cows before we go and do some research or some hunting. And we no more get out of the truck, and we hear 3 perfect whoops just booming right in a row. And I thought, wow, here we are. This is setting up good. So I put out the hay, and we make a round through the woods. We take the Polaris some, we walk some, and we hear 2 or 3 more good whoops, and then we hear our old favorite, the peacock sound again. We didn't stay there that long. We had stuff to do, so we called it a night pretty early, but we left out and came back the next day, the next afternoon. Horrible weather. It's raining. It's not necessarily freezing cold, but it's chilly. It's certainly the kind of weather that you'd rather just be in the house. But no, we got the new thermal camera. We got to do something. My girlfriend goes down to the lake. We have about an 8-acre lake, or a 3-acre lake that she had gone down to, and she's walking on the lake levee and honestly believes that she's hearing something, and she's actually thinking that she's being paralleled by one off into the creek. And we get down, when I actually get back down there, and we notice that there's this really odd trail that comes out of the creek, and it goes to the lake, and it goes down to the lake in an area that's very flat, where the bank is not steep. And there's this trail beat out. And so I instantly think it's probably beavers. I got to look around. There's no beaver sign whatsoever. And there's a very faint juvenile footprint that you can somewhat pick up. And so I thought this is an area that I'll put up one of my cameras in the future and see what happens. But we go back and we get the Polaris. Of course, it's pitch black now. The clouds are just thick clouds. Every once in a while the moon will poke through just for a second, but it goes back pitch black. So I got my thermal out. I'm just thrilled to death. I'm hogs, deer, funny things in trees, and we're having a big time. And of course, here again, we're rookies. We should have had GoPros going and recording devices, but we're enamored with the thermal. So there's an area that I'm wanting to go that's back off, and it's a cypress swamp. And so I'm wanting to go back down to that area. And so we're easing down this trail, and it gets to this point in this trail where that it's so thick that the trees have actually grown into themselves. So it's almost like you're going in a tunnel. And so as we're pulling up to this tunnel, or this trail, my girlfriend, now she doesn't tell me this at that time, but as we're pulling in there, she starts to get really anxious. She said just this anxious feeling just comes over. Of course, it's pitch black. We do have the headlights on the Polaris, but it's totally pitch black everywhere else. And she says she gets this feeling like she's just getting anxious. And just all of a sudden, out of nowhere, there's just this roar that is so loud that it actually is you can even clearly hear it over the Polaris motor. And I'm just basically stunned by it. I'm just sitting there in disbelief of what I'm hearing. And she says that I'm looking at her, and she said I'm actually smiling. And at this point, she is completely panicked, and she's freaking out. And she literally is so scared that she punches me because I'm not acting. I have no reaction. I'm just sitting there with a smile on my face like I'm crazy. And she literally punches me, and I come out of it, and she's, go, we got to get out of here. So we basically put it in reverse and hightail out of there. And I can tell she is scared. And at that point, I'm even starting to get scared then, because it sounded like the roar of a howler monkey. It just, you hear the people say that you can feel it. I can't honestly say that I felt it because there was a windshield in front of me, but I certainly heard it clearly over the Polaris motor. So we back up. We figured that's enough for one night. Of course, here again, after the fact, I got the thermal out. I'm trying to look. I'm not getting anything. But at that point, there again, we're rookies. We're out of Dodge. So we go back the next day. So we're on a mission. We're going to make it down there to the swamp. And so we're headed back there, and we're on the Polaris. Everything's doing good, and all of a sudden, the Polaris starts acting up. The thing's been running perfect, and all of a sudden, it just starts acting up, and it's blah, 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 blah. It's like there's an ignition problem. It hits and it quits. It hits and it quits and it hits, and then all of a sudden, it just quits. And there's no fire. And we sit there and try to fire it back up, and just no way. Of course, it's starting to get dark, and so the last place we want to be is out there on foot. And so we abandon the Polaris and hightail it back to the ranch headquarters, and end up going back the next day to get it and get on it. Fires right up. Now, I've heard people say on numerous podcasts that they have the ability to mess with electricity. I don't know if that's true or not, but what I can tell you is that this Polaris that was running perfectly all of a sudden quits. And when we go get it the next day, I don't know if they've moved on or what the deal is, but it fires right up. We end up going back again. Finally, we make it down into the swamp, and we get one good, I take that back. We get two good whoops, but they're at a distance, and that was about all we had time for. And I guess at that point, that's the last that I've been out there other than my daily stuff. There was a guy that was on your podcast, I think it's been months ago, and he had made a comment that he believes that they move in and out of areas. And I completely agree with that. We went a long time and didn't have any issues with hogs. And then all of a sudden we started having major issues with hogs. And I noticed that the activity level definitely increased when the hogs were there. Now the hogs have died out, and I've noticed that I'm not hearing the whoops. I'm not hearing the peacock. I'm not hearing such as that. And so I think that they've possibly moved on to another area, but I think that they move back around. I'm just keeping after it. And hopefully one day I'm trying. My goal is to get, I'd love to get a good cast, something that I can compare, something that I can show. Look, it's wider than it is. You know, it's not one of these that's really long. It's got some width to it. And so anyway, that's about it. I just wanted to share that, and maybe some other folks are in the same boat as I am, and they'll get to the point that they'll start to believe that they're down in the South as well.
John, you've got some incredible things going on that ranch. Thank you for sharing that. I have some thoughts, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I would recommend to do, if it was me in that situation, is I would take some advice from Chris Spencer from the Olympic Project. And you can watch about this on Small Town Monsters YouTube channel. Eli Watson has a documentary series he's been doing, but what Chris Spencer does is he will be wearing like a headlamp band, and he'll actually have a audio recorder in that headband. So when he leaves the vehicle, it's already recording, right? Because he says what you've also experienced is that usually when you get out of the cars right away, you're going to experience some type of whoop, which you've been experiencing already. But that might be a way that you'd be able to actually capture this audio if you're wanting to try to do that. And
oh, absolutely.
You can get a solid recorder for not that much. You can get a Tascam for just anywhere from like 80 something to 100. They're pretty inexpensive now. I'll put a link in the show notes for what I use personally, but wow.
And that is that's for audio recording.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be for audio, because it would be really cool if you could at least get some of the whoops recorded. That would be cool.
I think the one that really, of course, that roar was, now that, I did not see that coming a million miles away. I'm enamored with the peacock because it sounds like a male peacock. And I know good that we don't have any peacocks out there. And I just get tickled and I have to laugh when I hear it. I'm thinking to myself, it's just ridiculous. What are they doing? And the other thing is this when it sounds like that gibbon monkey. Mm-hmm. That's unusual to me. And I've had people to say, owls do that. I'm like, in the middle of the day, I've never experienced. I experience owls doing some stuff at night, but not at 2 p.m, at least in my opinion. But yes, you couldn't be more right. We've made so many rookie mistakes, it's not even fun. But it's like anything else that you do. You get out there, you experience it, and you learn, and you just do better the next time. Absolutely.
Let's see. I'm looking through my notes here. We're leaving the location at East Texas, right? We just have to be nebulous about East Texas.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I would say Southeast Texas.
Gotcha. Are you able to share any more about the female researcher that you had been talking to, or?
I cannot remember her. For the life of me, I can't remember her name. She was sitting at our table, and I know, if I'm not mistaken, she had done work with the Woodacre Conservatory.
NAWAC, yeah.
She had worked with them, and this was a super smart lady. She really, in a lot of ways, she was a lot of the catalyst that really got me to focus. When she mentioned what she did about the turtles, that really, because that is something that I have been seeing for years. The turtles split in part, and I'm thinking, that's kind of weird. But never really put the pieces together. And then she was like, turtles or meat of a turtle, highly nutritious and easily caught, and make a nice little meal. And when she made mention of that, I was like, wow, that's definitely something that made sense to me.
Yeah, it's very smart. If any listeners have an idea of who that might be, you can put it in the comments, or if you need to reach out to me, email, you can do it that way too, bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Sounds like that might be someone fun to chat with for sure. Would you be able to share the photos that you took?
Yes, yeah.
Awesome. That would be really cool to see those. It's funny that you mentioned the lead singer of Insane Clown Posse, because I've actually, if you're talking about the same guy, I actually interviewed him on the podcast because he had a Bigfoot encounter just outside of Detroit. So we talked a while back. So
I had actually read that somewhere, and I was thinking, you got to be kidding me. The actual guy, the actual singer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I said, this photo, some people can look at it, and like I said, they will instantly say, oh, yeah. And then other people will just stare at it and go, I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't know. There again, I find it hard to believe that it's shadows or something of that. You can clearly see two eyes, the glare of the sun coming off its nose, and the glare of the sun shining off the bald spot on its head. It's there to see. And now in the second photo where that it's over by the stump, that was a little more difficult. But for me, seeing exactly where it was at, it was clear to me to where that I could understand what was going on. And having seen the bald spot, I could definitely notice it again, even though this was at a far greater distance. It wasn't as close as the other one was, but there again, that smell, I would have never stopped and just taken random pictures had I not got that odor. I mean, that odor just inside of a beaver den just stopped me dead in my tracks. I mean, I was like, that's weird, because I was not near water, and that one definitely just stopped me. And there again, the one of the like I said, it looks like it's hip. I mean, you can clearly see it's something. What, I don't know, but that's the only. I have had every kind of trail camera you can imagine out in every kind of place you can imagine, and that is the only what I would call good picture that I've got. I've gotten some images at a distance that looking at, you're like, man, there's something out there, but it's not something you can say yes or no to. And that, to me, that is the biggest mystery in the whole Bigfoot universe to me, is why there's just not more caught on trail cams. But obviously they have got an ability to elude them. And I think only because I have gone to the great extent to get this thing up in this dead tree and camouflage it in all kind of different ways. I think that's the only reason that I got what I got. I think if they're even halfway camouflaged, I think they're detected somehow. And I did have one experience one time. Of course, I don't know. I may be reading something into it, but I was back and I was fixing some fence on the back corner of this property. And so anyway, I'm gathering up my tools and I'm walking back to the mule, and all of a sudden I just got this horrible, of course, I'm 60 years old, dizzy spells part of the game, but I was actually feeling really good, and boom, I just got this really strange dizzy sensation come over me, and I made it to the mule and I sat down. Of course, I drank some water, and I wasn't overheated or anything like that. And there again, I got thinking, I thought, what was that all about? And then, of course, you hear people that say that they have that ability to do that. And so there again, I don't know, but it makes me wonder.
Absolutely. Have you, I guess you're in an interesting situation because the ranch is so big, but have you talked to any neighbors that are on the outskirts of the ranch to see if they've experienced anything out of the ordinary?
We really don't have any neighbors that are in the core of the ranch, of the main body. They're on the outskirts, but in those areas, it's relatively populated. But what I have experienced is the adjacent land behind the ranch that is the Type 2 preserve. I've talked to several people. Well, I say several. I've talked to probably 4 or 5 people that have. I was talking to this one guy. He's passed away, I'm thinking now, but years ago, I think it was back in the 90s, him and a buddy were going duck hunting And there's a lot of sloughs in this area. And so him and his buddy, they were going duck hunting, and they drove their truck to this area where you had to park, and there was a gate. And I think if you had a permit, you had a key or something. But so they get up to this gate, and they're going through the gate, and the guy said it's in the morning, it's dark, and he's got his flashlight in his mouth, and he's going through the gate, and all of a sudden he looks down and he sees a footprint, and he's, man, what is that? And so he calls his buddy over there, and they're looking. Of course, this is before cell phone cameras and all that, but they're thinking, wow, that's crazy. And so they dismiss it, and they walk another couple of 100 feet, and then all of a sudden the footprints come back into this trail. And so they follow them, and you can clearly follow them. So they follow him to the edge of this slough, and he said they get there. He said it's still dark, but he said you can hear this. And he said he takes his light and he shines it. It's cypress trees, basically, and he shines it. And he says that about 70 yards away, or not, about 30 yards away, he said that they see this figure, and they say it just basically, they see it for a couple of seconds, and then it just disappears behind some brush. And he was a believer all his life. And I talked to another man that he actually had some property. Now, he since had sold it to the timber company, and they actually planted in it. They put in a eucalyptus plantation, but this guy had a place back there, and he was an older guy, and he said that he would hear them all the time. It wasn't nothing for him to hear them 2 or 3 times a week. Whoops, hollers, yells, the whole 9 yards. Imitations of his cat. And I have talked to, and then there was another guy that was a dentist that I had talked to once before, that he was in one of the rivers fishing, and that he said that same kind of deal. He said they were sitting there fishing, and he said all of a sudden they heard this splash, and he said they happened to look up into this kind of a slough area, and he said they see this creature just for a second, just basically going across the slough. And this guy, for years in his retirement, they tell me that he would come down and just set out cameras and look and whatnot. But so yeah, a few people. I have talked to some other people that have had some pretty interesting sightings on the Sabine River, which is not terribly far from where we're at, and some pretty interesting stories coming out of that part of the world, which, in my opinion, that's more of the hot spot in East Texas. I had talked to a guy, very interesting story. They were from a contracting company out of Tyler, and they were down working on a bridge over by the Sabine River on just a county road. It wasn't no major thoroughfare, and they're doing some work on this bridge. And so the county, there was some kind of a area that the county used for gravel or something, and they allowed them to put up their campers in this area so they wouldn't have to drive back and forth to get a motel. And so the guy's like, we've got our fifth wheel parked there, and he said that they every night they would cook out on the pit, and he said it smelled great. He said we had pork butt and barbecue and everything else, and he said that one night he said they were laying there in bed, and he said that he was in the bedroom of his fifth wheel, which is obviously in the front part, which is high, and he said that he said it was perfectly still. He said that the air conditioner wasn't running, and he had his windows open. Or he had one of his windows open, and he said that you could literally hear something thump, thump, and he sat up and he looked around, and he thought, I'm just hearing things. And then he said, just out of the blue, he said that the moonlight was shining into the fifth wheel, and so he said all of a sudden something distorted the light. And he said he glanced over to the window, which was closed, and he said he saw a hand up against that window. And he said he went screaming. He said the hand went away, and he said everybody woke up, and they're, what the hell's going on? They turn on the lights and look around, and of course man, I saw somebody's out there. I seen their hand up there, and they were like, nobody's here. And so they all went back to bed, and the next morning they woke up, and they had left, I forget, they'd left something out there on the pit, and that, whatever it was that they left out there, was gone. But he said that you could still clearly see the smudge of the handprint on the window. And I thought, man, that's a pretty close encounter. But that, like I said, that was over closer to the Sabine River area.
Yeah, the Sabine River definitely has some wild stuff. And if listeners want to hear more about that, read more about that, Lyle Blackburn has a great book on Texas Bigfoot that he came out with this last year. Definitely recommend looking into that. Oh, at the beginning of our interview, you had mentioned in passing about talking to Iditarod mushers and bush pilots about Bigfoot way back when you had been traveling. Is there anything that you remember from those conversations, or?
Yeah, actually a couple of things. We were talking to this one musher that was saying that when they're training these dogs, they'll start off like on 50-mile courses, and then they build them up and build them up and build them up. And so they've actually got numerous teams. And so it's not like they have one team. They have several, and then they'll end up picking out the best groups to actually run the Iditarod. There's several mushers that go out, and these guys, they'll go out for 2 or 3 days and work these dogs. And this one guy, his name was Billy, I remember that. And he was telling me that this would have been up by Whitehorse up in the Yukon. And he was telling me that they were camping by a river. It wasn't, I'm trying to remember, it wasn't in the time of the year when it was bitter cold. The sunlight was out. It must have been in the spring. And so there was still snow, but it's not just horrible dark and cold. And he said it's starting to thaw. And so they had run this course, and he was saying that they had set up camp by this river. And he said that they had typical deal, take care of the dogs first, got the dogs fed, got the dogs staked out. And he's in there in his tent. And he, being Native American, I think they have an ability to sometimes sense things. And he said he's got an uneasy feeling. And he goes back out of the tent, but he said all the dogs are not acting up. He said that they're all basically bed down. And he said that he just had this strange feeling that something was out there. And so he goes back, he finishes getting a little bite to eat, he lays down, and he says, there again, he said something is like telling him there's something out there. So he puts on his headlamp, he goes back out. The dogs are still, typically the dogs would smell something, sense something, but he said nothing. And he goes back out there, and he said that he's looking around, there's nothing, and he's sitting there thinking to himself, your mind's playing tricks on you. You just need to go on to bed. You got a big day tomorrow. And he said he walks up to the tent. He's fixing to go into the tent, and he said something just tells him stop. And so he backs out, and he takes his headlight, and he looks down. He said there was like a row of trees that was by this creek or river. And he said he looks down these rows of trees, and he said that at about the 10th tree, which I don't remember, I think he was saying it was like maybe 50 yards away or something. He said there's this creature that is standing behind a tree, but the tree is not big enough to hide it. You can see the shoulder on this side and the shoulder on this side. And he said that he's shining the light on it just clearly. And he said he doesn't know whether to get his gun. He doesn't really know what to do. He's just waiting it out. And he said after about a couple of minutes, he said all of a sudden, he said you see it tilt its head a little bit. And he said you can clearly see one eye, and he said it turns, and he said it just vanishes in a split second. It's just gone. And he said that next morning they went over there, and he said there were some sure enough good sized footprints, but to them it's like just another day. I've heard Grandpa told me about them. Just don't mess with them; they won't mess with me, and they go on about it. A lot of the bush pilots that you'll talk to, there was one guy I was talking to, and he said that, of course, when you're flying a plane in Alaska, it's not autopilot. Your hands and feet are working all the time because of the terrain and the weather. So it's not a situation where you can drive around with your camera in your hand. But he said that, and this wasn't just one. This was a couple of them had said that you'll be flying along there, and he said all of a sudden you'll glance down there on the river, and bam, you'll see one. Just for a second. They'll notice you coming, and and they're boom, they're in the woods. And so I thought, I would imagine that it made sense to me that in their job that they do see them quite often, or more than what you would think anyway. And then of course a lot of the guys that work the rafts, when you're in a raft and you're fishing, you're basically, and so you're not making any noise, and you're flowing down that river, and you'll come around a bend. And that didn't happen with us, but we were in a place called Talkeetna, which is the neatest little town you ever saw in your life. And there was some river guides there that we took a fishing trip with. And there was a guy that was saying that the year prior, they had rounded a bend, and they had seen one out there about knee deep. And he said that it seen them, they seen it just back in the woods.
It's fascinating stories, John. You're an absolute wealth of information. Thank you.
Like I said, I think there's a lot of people that are in my same boat that grew up believing that they're in the Pacific Northwest. They're in Canada, they're in Alaska. And it's not until you just really take the time to look deeper into, or to just explore the things that you're just dismissing. And maybe they are. There may be times where you hear something and yeah, it is a coyote. But then other times it may not be. And if you're one of those people that you're riding the fence and you're like, I think what you'll find if you just spend a little more time and look a little bit closer, that you might be surprised. And like I said, I'm looking to get that good cast one day. That's my goal, is to find I've got my casting kit and everything ready to go when that day comes, but that's what I'm after. We'll see.
You say your main goal is to get a really good cast, but what happens if you're out there in the cypress and you actually get a visual face-to-face with a wood ape? Have you thought that through?
I don't know. After the episode with the roar, I'm not even sure that I could keep myself together. You listen to these podcasts and you hear these people that have these experiences, these close-up experiences,
mm-hmm.
and I just got to wonder, could I keep it together but it was so strange. Like I said, my girlfriend was in full-blown panic mode now. She was panicked. And I was off in another world. When we talked about it, I told her, I said, I did hear the roar, but my mind was sitting there processing, what was that? And I said, the fear didn't come upon me until I'd actually processed the fact that, oh my gosh, that was something. And then I'm like, oh, good Lord. When you talk, I hear people that are like, I got my trusty 45. That some guy ain't gonna get me. Yeah. I'm here to tell you what. If a Bigfoot wanted to take you out, I don't care what you got. You're gone. I mean, that's clear to me. They're just so stealthy that you're just not going to do it. And that gets on another subject, that talking to the people in Canada and so forth, is that they believe that Sasquatch, in a lot of ways, are like people, that they have different personalities. I know my girlfriend she's of the belief, man, them ones that are red fur, if they got that red fur, they're mean.
Right.
They're nasty. But if they're brown or black, they're more docile. And of course, I'm always laughing at it, but if you really get to looking at it, you listen to people, and the ones that are the red fur actually do seem to be a little bit more aggressive. And there's no science behind it that I've come up with, but other than just hearing people's stories. So
I've heard that as well. Yeah.
And so I agree. I think that they've got distinct. It's like anybody else. It's what were you exposed to coming up that caused you to be the way you are? And so I think that the ones that are violent have probably been exposed to that, and the ones that are not have probably been exposed to kindness. And so I think that affects how they actually act. But I do believe overall they're extremely shy creatures, in my opinion.
Last question for you. It's a weird one, and if you don't have anything, that's fine. It's actually a question for all the listeners too, just in case. But have you ever heard anything weird coming out of the Franklin County, Texas area?
I have heard. Are you talking as far as just weird in general?
Mainly Bigfoot related, but I guess that could be anything, but mainly Bigfoot related.
I have heard some stories, but what I've heard has more been, I don't know, a mix of Bigfoot Dogman.
Really?
What I've heard. Now, that for what that's worth, but I have heard of some strange things happening in that area. Of course, another area that's got strange stuff happening is down in Saratoga, Texas, where the Bragg Light is at.
Sure.
There's a lot of people that, or I say a lot of people, there are people that believe that, of course, the legend is the train conductor lost his head and he's looking for his head and got the light. There are people, of course, that's backed up to the Big Thicket Preserve, which is thousands of acres of preserve.
Absolutely.
And there's people that when you start talking to those people, those are the people that believe that Bigfoot has got something to do with portals. And they believe that the light that people see, I've actually been down there and seen it, what that's worth. But yeah, and it's what it looks like. It looks like in the distance, there's this, of course, this was back in the 90s when I saw it, there's this dancing light. And I have no explanation. I've heard everything under the sun, swamp gas, you name it, the moon, shadows. But there are some people that believe that is a portal. And that is why that there are some people that there's quite a few sightings from time to time down in that area, Bigfoot related. And you've got that group of people that say, hey, that's that portal.
So in Franklin County, you said is there actual dogman sightings around that area too? Or they were seen together, or a kind of separate sightings with dogman versus Bigfoot?
The stories that I've heard, now I've heard a few people with Bigfoot related stories, but I was listening to, but I was listening to a guy that I think he was on Dark Waters.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yep.
And I think this guy was from over there, and it was Dogman related, this guy. And I'm thinking this guy I'm wanting to say that this guy was even a deputy sheriff. Don't quote me on that, but it seemed like he was a constable or something like that. And I specifically remember it was Dogman.
Very interesting. It has been a fun time chatting with you, John. Thank you so much for reaching out to me.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. I hear your podcasts, and I just like the way you do business. I just really appreciate you.
Thank you. And I don't think that the activity is going to let up on your ranch that you deal with. So please keep me in the loop with what continues to happen down there. Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list. Number 1, encounters from Franklin County, Texas. Number 2, encounters from the entire state of Iowa. Number 3, encounters from Oak Ridge, Oregon, or the surrounding area. Number 4, any individuals that know about Bigfoot being flown off after the Mount St. Helens eruption. Number 5, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter while in the military. Number 6, those that have had a Bigfoot encounter in the southern New Hampshire or north central Massachusetts area, including Franklin County, Massachusetts. Number 7, individuals that have had a Bigfoot encounter in a Bible camp or Boy Scout camp setting. Number 8, individuals that have had Bigfoot try to enter their house forcibly while they were living inside. Number 9, individuals that have actively have a Bigfoot living on their property. And lastly, any sightings that are in the Ouachita National Forest area of Oklahoma or Arkansas. A special thank you to all the Bigfoot Society Patreon and YouTube channel members. It's your support that helps keep the show going, and I extremely appreciate it. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one. If you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.